first, the first part of our panel discussion. And I suppose you talked about that in a particular case study, the Scottish case study. You talked about, it sounded like a lot of innovation had taken place in that project. So how did you find in terms of like the people's technical ability? Because that's something that's come up in the previous presentations, and it's also come up in the chat area. So, and we've seen it ourselves, right? You know, like we've seen exams where, say, people have, we sort of presume that maybe because of a certain age group, if depending on what type of organization you are, oh, you know, people are all on social media, therefore they're super literate, technically literate, and they can type at 500 words a minute, and you know, they're amazing. And obviously we've seen that actually it varies a lot. In the first of the two case studies that you spoke about, like, did you see that, and how did you address that and help people engage maybe where they didn't have those technical skills or keyboard skills?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with any digital project, it can be a big change, and change is quite a hard thing for anyone of any skill set, never mind a digital change where there is, as you say, sometimes that apparent lack of confidence that can be a real game changer. And although this project has been a huge success, we did take a lot of time to get it up and running. So we did some focus groups with the client, a kind of consultative approach to actually, let's get some of your assessors together and let's suggest this to them and let's try it out and what's their feedback. And there was some that were really struggling. So then we looked at how can we empower you? How can we give the confidence? And we really worked with them and spent a lot of time in that kind of training and development. Because if the assessors aren't comfortable using it, then the whole process just falls flat. So that was kind of a key area. They were the ones using technology, and it was so important they felt comfortable and enabled to do their job. Otherwise, the project was going nowhere. And as I say, part of that process was actually identifying that quite a few of them were unable to use the touchscreen devices. And I mean, we were puzzled. We were going back and forward. Have we missed something? Is it something simple? Is it something in the codes? And it turned out to be something as simple as their fingertips just were not compatible. And I mean, I certainly had never thought that was a possibility until we went and we worked with them, and we thought, kind of had that light bulb moment of, right, we need to adjust this to fit your needs.
That's really interesting, because that sort of extends on from Sheryl's presentation, really, right? And accessibility is like, it's not just what you would see as being traditional requirements, you know, and things that you need to think about from an accessibility point of view, but it's like, yeah, as you say, I think it's like cold finger syndrome, isn't it, or something, where the touch screens don't work. But it's I suppose it's quite interesting, because then it makes people think, yes, walk a few miles in other people's shoes as well. Yeah, I mean, Sheryl, have you seen that in your work, that the sort of the definition of those who need extra accommodations and so on is becoming wider? Or, what's your experience in terms of even digital capability and people's digital skills?
Yeah, well, it's yeah, there's I don't know if it's getting wider or not. It's always been pretty wide, but more things are provided in digital form. And so you know, applying universal design, you'd address all these issues. And so, you know, touching the screen, for instance, yeah, absolutely. You would not, if you applied universal design, ever have a product that required that you touch the screen. So what does that mean?
Absolutely, yeah.
Provide keyboard access to whatever you're doing. If the moment you do that, you don't have to be concerned anymore about people not being able to touch the screen because they can't move their hand, or because of the sensitivity we're just talking about. So that's where universal design, this broad concept, just kind of takes care of those issues. Now, you do have to make sure that the technology you're using makes it clear that you can do both things. And so having this be transparent, you know, very usable, that's another aspect. But the universal design piece says, oh, wow, yeah, we need to consider these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, yeah, I think that universal design is something that I think is really important to have as a core sort of pillar of any sort of development of any platform, whether it's a third-party platform or something you're building in-house. I guess the other area where it's and I'd be interested in Karen and Christine's views on this is also accessibility from the point of view of sort of digital poverty. You know, not having the facilities, particularly. We've seen this massive push to online assessment, And we're seeing it certainly sticking. We've run a number of very, very fantastic projects over the last while, and certainly many of them are not going back, you know, to traditional assessments. But digital poverty is also a form of, I think, a big challenge, particularly in second level education, maybe a little bit less so in third level education. But I'd be, Christine and Karen, I'd be really interested in your views on it. Karen, maybe first.
Thank you. You sat kind of looking at each other like
deadlock. Yeah, deadlock. Yeah, yeah.
No, I think that's exactly right. And actually, you know, something Sheryl said that isn't exactly what you were getting at, but really resonates with some of Christine and my own research, is this idea that universal design should include people's social comfort. And when you think both about digital poverty, but also about equity in general, we've done some research looking at how different types of classroom assessments might create inequities. And one thing that we've been really interested to see, and you know, this sort of goes throughout the equity literature, is that the things that increase equity between underserved ethnic minorities and majorities also seem to serve many other minority groups. So we've been disaggregating grades on assignments in different ways. And it's not like you do something that's going to reduce racial inequities and it hurts other people. In fact, every group that we looked at, whether it's low-income students, transfer students, students with disabilities, all of those groups are helped. And a lot of it has to do with the fact that I think oftentimes in our assessments, whether it's making digital assumptions about people's access or cognitive assumptions, right, about the clarity of our instructions, that everybody has an equal understanding of the base material or the assignment structure, all of those things, either you need to know or you need to have that sense of privilege and belonging that enables you to ask. And as soon as you force somebody to ask, you're creating inequities.
Yes.
And so I think the design concept is critical to be expanded beyond technology and to everything we do in our assessments, so that rather than needing to accommodate somebody, right, rather than the student needing to say, I'm not familiar with this source you're referring me to, or I don't understand what a formal essay is, we need to upfront create that structure that's accessible and given to everybody. Because as soon as we create a situation where you have to say, oh, excuse me, my Wi-Fi doesn't let me be on screen, or I don't understand what this is, even if you supply it at that moment, you've disadvantaged that student because you've activated in them a sense of not belonging. And then even if they get the access, that can interfere with their ability to fully show their mastery of the content.
Yeah, and I think also as well, like depending on the age group as well, and depending on the cohort that they're involved in, they may even feel very embarrassed about, you know, raising a point that they're not aware, or, you know, that they're not completely in tune with how to do things. No, that's really interesting. Christine, would you really interested in your views on this topic as well?
Sure. You know, as Karen indicated, we're researching an area, but what I want to say is UNC Charlotte, which you will see in my background, we have a large number of transfer students who come to us from the community college. And we found our faculty members last spring had challenges moving their courses to an online format. Most just wanted to dump what they had from the face-to-face to online, and they figured out it wasn't working. And our students, you know, not only did they not, you know, we have rural students, we have urban students, we had students who just didn't have the technology or bandwidth that, you know, our administrators and faculty just did not understand. So, you know, last spring, we tried to get it together, but it was a challenge. We did a little bit better in the fall, and we're doing a little bit better in the spring, but it is a challenge for us to work with faculty just to understand and recognize not all students are the same. And you have to think through, before you prepare your curriculum, who are the students coming to me and what do I have to do to help all of my students in the classroom be successful?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, and we won't go down this slippery slope, but I mean, there's lots of issues people are having even around proctoring, you know, very strict proctoring that hadn't been thought out, and and people not even having a space, a quiet space to do their exams and assessments. But I won't go down that slippery slope, because that we could be here for another hour just on that topic. But I think, as you say, it's almost like everybody walking a mile in another person's shoes to understand their experience. So a wider piece I'd like to quickly chat about is an area that thinking about today's session was an area around, I suppose, politics and assessment, right? If you think of over the last year, assessment has become very politicized in some countries. And I know certainly in Ireland and the UK, there's, it's just been ridiculous, the level, for example, I won't name names, right? But like, say there's a particular government minister in the UK, and he's obsessed with the traditional written, the written exam that hasn't changed in probably 200 years in the UK, and is just obsessed about it. And you only have to search on Twitter to see everybody, every time something he says, it gets retweeted by the assessment community and pretty much ripped to pieces. So I suppose a wide question I'd like to ask all of you is what can we do in the assessment community to better communicate and basically get better and stronger buy-in from those in power, whether that's within I suppose in government agencies and the wider journalistic community and newspapers and the general mainstream media, to get better buy-in to more efficient and effective ways of assessing. Sheryl, would you like to kick off? I'd be interested in your views on that one.
Oh, that's a real tough one.
Yeah, it's a very, very deep one, right?
Oh, yeah, that's a really tough one. But I think having some kind of a framework you're coming from can kind of neutralize the topic. So that's one thing to think about. So kind of going back, I always like to, when I'm talking to people that are politically oriented, or even administrators in my campus, I like to come from a point of agreement. And I think sometimes we talk too much about the procedures we're recommending, or even in the issues. We think about, what is the agreement? Can we agree that we'd like to use an instrument where everyone has an equal chance to show what they've learned, or whatever, meet these objectives? And even administrators that are politicians that are kind of pushing back on many of those issues you're talking about today, they might be willing to agree to that. And so then you realize at least you're arguing about what you really want to argue about. You're talking about implementation of that, or representing that equal access. If you have a politician that just simply does not believe that people of different races should have an equal chance at things, I don't think you can get back to a point of agreement. But usually I can come up with, well, don't we think that students with disabilities should be included in this, like our DEI efforts I mentioned at the beginning? That what about Black students with disabilities? Shouldn't they be comfortable in your group that you're doing focus groups on, about the experiences of Black students, for instance? Well, of course they say yes, and then it gets down to, well, we just don't know how to do that. Well, then let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we can give you the resources you need to do that. But too often our arguments are kept at this higher level, and they should go all the way down to where we can agree and build up from there.
So it's really, I think, strong negotiation based on, I suppose, almost like what's right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Emma, I'd be really interested, because certainly I think being based, I suspect, in Scotland, that
Yes.
You've probably seen a lot of what's been going on in, say, Ireland and the UK for the last year, where it's actually got quite ugly, like where main, newspapers, certain newspapers are really ripping apart forms of assessment in ways that they probably shouldn't be. What's your view on it, and what do you think we can do in the community?
Yeah, I think it's tough to see. It's always disheartening when you come across that and you think, is that where we're at? Like, we've worked so hard to progress things, as you say, as a community, and it is tough to see. I think from our point of view, and as Sheryl said, it's almost trying to negotiate and reason and having that framework. So providing the data, and we always suggest let's try it. Let's try a small pilot. We're not asking you to commit, but let's just do a really small sample, see what the results are, and actually you might be surprised. So again, just going back to that key data, because unless you try it, you're not going to know output. But that really does obviously rely on the person being open-minded and willing to listen, which is not always the case. But yeah, that's certainly that having that evidence to hand and persuasiveness to try something, even in a small scale. You were talking maybe 10, 15 people, it doesn't have to be large, but making sure you're covering that diverse audience, and hopefully praying and hoping that the results are the push you need to kind of to help with that. And I think the community is so great doing that. So many advancements in some of the sessions here and later today, and all the things we're talking about is actually helping that cause and sharing best practice and sharing kind of those lessons that we've learned.
Yeah, I suppose. I think that's a really interesting point, really about showing the successes. And as you say, it doesn't have to be on a huge national scale. Yeah. It can be small. I mean, we've worked on a project very recently where a very, very old, established bar association type organization have moved everything online and are never going to go back, you know, to how they did it. And I think it's by showing those. I think that's actually a really good way of doing it. We can't fix politics, but maybe we can show what we can fix. Karen, what's your view on it?
Well, you know, I used to, when I was a teacher, always tell my students that criticism is an invitation for growth. And I think even though sometimes politicians and politics can be a force for perpetuating existing structures and maybe even racist structures, I think within every criticism from politics, there is an invitation to growth. And I think Emma was kind of picking up on that. And I think two key areas that we really have weakness in assessment is linking our assessment findings, I'm sorry about the noise outside my window, to important long-term outcomes. And so I think we need to do a much better job of following student learning and accomplishment over time and to critical outcomes that matter to students and maybe even that matter to society as represented by politicians. And so that's the kernel of truth that I think is in there. I think we'd be much more effective at getting the pressure to continue with existing methods of assessment relieved if we could show that new methods of assessment were more equitable and predicted important outcomes in clear ways.
I think that's really interesting. So it's like it's not just collecting the data, it's the long-term data. And then I suppose it's really bubbling it up to key decision makers, and hopefully, as Emma said, you know, you sort of need to have, and they need to have an open mind to be able to accept that change is okay, that like just because something's been done the same way for 200 years, maybe there's opportunities to, and I suppose the last year has seen probably more change. I think this was mentioned at the conference back last year that we've seen more change in the last year than in probably a number of decades before. Christine, what's your view on this?
Thank you for asking. So one of our grand challenges is on driving innovation. And I think, you know, at least at our institution and possibly other institutions, we do not lack for data. What we do lack is the ability to interpret and tell stories about it and share that with multiple different types of audiences based on their need. And so in relationship to the Drive Innovation Grand Challenge, you know, we talk about making the data more visible, disseminating the results in a visualization way, because we tend to write.
Yeah.
At the university level, but presenting it in a different way, in a different manner. Also disaggregating the information. You know, we don't do a good job of that unless it's required, at least we don't, unless it's required for accreditation or some kind of rule or regulation. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think the visualization ideas, because I'd be like that, a very visual person, but I think also hearing sometimes like the student stories as well, like, you know, how I think that can really connect with people. And I think those stories are often very memorable where data can sort of fall out of your head very quickly, actually hearing about how maybe an alternative form of assessment or a different way of delivering an assessment, it could actually have a difference and make a difference. Well, listen, thank you very, very much to all of you for joining me today on this panel discussion. I found it very, very interesting, and thank you for your fantastic presentations. We're going to go into a break very, very shortly, into a sort of lunch and networking with some lightning demos. But as I said, my name is Piero Tintori. I'm with Better Examinations. We're building we deliver a platform for delivering exams and assessments worldwide. So if you're interested in what we do, always happy to connect, and delighted to have so many of you attend today. And thank you very much to the panel as well. Delighted to have all of you and to hear your views today. Thank you very, very much.
Okay, everybody. Welcome back. And this is Jeff Ross again here.